I'm here to tell you about things that which are completely out of sight and actually out of mind, because I'm going to tell you about the deep sea, the deep ocean, things that are happening way below the surface of the ocean, up to 2,000 meters of depth or more, and also things that are happening out of sight which are political. And so, as we're here to try to empower ourselves and try to lead to action and really change the world, looking into the future and trying to do better than we do, then really I thought I have to share with you a few things that I know. First, I want to show you a couple of pictures of what happens down there in the ocean, because we don't know of these animals, this massive diversity of species, which are usually quite weird, and that makes it at least fun to look at. And very unknown, but in terms of how many animals are down there and what the diversity of life can be found on the planet, the deep sea is pretty much like the tropical rainforest. This is a huge reservoir of species that we don't know. And every time we look down there, we explore, there's only 1% of the deep ocean that's been really sampled. But when we do look down and we try to sort species, we realize we don't know a lot of them. And we, for example, on average, describe one new species out of the deep ocean every 2 weeks. So we really are facing a whole new world. This is a new frontier with lots of creatures which are extremely fragile, because they work, they basically live in an environment which has no light, no food. All the food that there is actually is the one that drops from the surface. So you'll see animals like this one, which is extremely strange. And these are, these creatures, for example, this is an animal which is the longest animal on the planet. So this is like 3 times the size of a blue whale. And of course, this is gelatinous, so we don't know it. We don't really, pay attention to it, because, up until very recently, we would collect these animals and they would completely, of course, dismantle in the nets. So it took direct observations and manned submersibles to go down there and really understand what we're talking about. We're talking about the largest reservoir of species, and these are extremely, let's say extraordinary, but they also can be useful to us. And these animals are very diverse, but they are not able to withstand huge biomasses. So if you go down basically in a submersible, you're maybe a little disappointed because you're not going to be seeing all these animals all at once. But if you did dive every day, then you would line up just an amount of species, which is extraordinary. But all of a sudden, like these animals that we see on the rock there, whenever there is a crop or outcrop or a rock or whatever, you will see that there's a direct benefit for the animals to aggregate around these things. Like here, we found these rocks, and the researchers near California kept going back to these rocks, and over the years, they found that these octopi that are out there on these rocks have not moved for 3 years. They were just looking at basically looking over their eggs. This is the longest brooding time that we've ever found in the animal kingdom. And we are really dealing with the sort of planet of record. This is a sponge, and this can be 100 years, 200 years, to a long time. From these organisms, these deep sea sponges, we're finding compounds that can help us fight cancer, a lot of diseases. We were already using them in some industrial applications. We find that in the deep sea, we think of corals in general. We associate corals with, the Great Barrier Reef, maybe Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, very warm waters near to us. And it turns out that the majority of corals actually live in the deep ocean. So you will find that there are very few species, though. Only 6 species of deep sea corals can form reefs, like you will see on this picture. The bulk of corals, like more than 3,000 species, will live scattered on the sea floor. And some of these animals, like we see here, these corals hold a role. They have a role of like a tree, basically. So they have branches, and these branches, sometimes you find an egg. And this was the case here with a deep sea coral, maybe at 2,000 meters of depth. Researchers were intrigued by the presence of this egg, and they had no clue what it was. So they picked it up, and it turned out that this egg hatched on the boat, on the research ship, and it was a deep sea finned octopus, what we call Dumbo octopus. It was for the first time ever. So we have so many more questions than we have answers to, about these deep sea animals. And these deep sea, finned octopus live They're ubiquitous. You'll find them all over the deep ocean. And you'll find also that, so they lay their eggs in these like deep sea corals, and you'll find that a deep sea coral like this is actually the record holder of longevity in the animal kingdom on Earth. And this very species lives all the way to 4,200 years old. I mean, this is, you know, how crazy it is, because we only know of one tree species that can live longer. So we are just discovering this, and this was described in 2009. So, you know, step by step, we're discovering these huge deep ocean, which covers probably more than 2/3 of our planet. And as we speak, we have to think that the biggest mass of living organisms in the world have never seen daylight and will never. They live in the dark, and we just tend to completely forget them, right? We don't think about them actually on a daily basis, but they count. They count in global cycles. They count for recycling nutrients and for stabilizing, of course, the oceans stabilize the climate and so on. And so these animals also have a value, let's say, a heritage. You can think of them as useful because you can use them for the lab, you know, for medical purposes. At some point, you may find molecules and compounds that we can use, but you can also think of them as just your sort of DNA bank, because they've been around for so long, and they've been stable for so long, and they've been living out of sight and also out of mind, and nothing could reach them, really. And all of a sudden, that was no longer true. And this is what would happen to them. We sand, because we've overfished our surface waters so much that, you know, in the 1980s and 1990s, our ships went further down, deeper into the deep ocean, and we started hitting animals and creatures and environments which had never been hit before, and they are not fit for the pace of technology. So we're facing this extreme, you know, vulnerability and biological slowness, which is, you know, confronted now with these massive nets, which are weighted and which are going down all the way there and are scraping everything that they find in their wake. And of course, once they catch a huge deep sea coral, like this was in the Southern Ocean in the Southern Pacific, they don't know what to do with them, right? These are fishermen. They're out there to find the last, you know, edible deep sea fish that you can then, you know, catch, and afterwards there's going to be nothing left, maybe jellyfish. And of course they dump them overboard. So this is just like taking, you know, I don't know, Egyptian mummies, you know, and just dumping them like trash, because you don't give any, you know, sort of value to your heritage, and this is your natural patrimony in life. So what's the fishing technique that allows that and that does that? It's called deep sea bottom trawling. And there's a little, you know, explanation there. So you've got a ship on the surface which sands weighted nets all the way down to up to 2,000 meters. Today it's a bit shallower because we've already overfished a lot of the animals that we could find at 2,000. So it's still going on at around 1,400, 1,500 meters, which is extremely deep. And you'll see on the side of the nets there are doors. So we call them big doors, and you see they've been highlighted there. And on this picture, you can see that these doors are massive. So you're thinking, what are these people doing? Are they gearing up to actually be sending a rocket to the moon or something? What's this huge industrial gear? Do we need this to be actually catching fish? What is it? What is the helmet story here? You know, are we catching fish? And so if you show this to artisanal fishermen, you know, that go out on their one boat with a line and a hook or, you know, a trap or something, they're like, this is really insane. Look at the size of these nets and look at the rock hopper gear, which is actually designed to scrape things along the bottom. It is designed to crush things in order to make sure that the net actually goes down to the very deep ocean, in order to make sure that the net doesn't get damaged from encounters with deep sea living things. So they just crush everything, and that's what happens. So at the end of the day, what is left over? This is what's left over after the passage of one single passage of a trawl in the deep sea, and it wipes out just literally everything. This is an illustration. This is a 3D image that shows you the type of you know, diversity of animals that get caught. And if it happened in the savannah with elephants and rhinoceroses and so on, we would probably not accept it, right? And actually, there would be a lot of witnesses around here, and you would all be posting, and you'd be tweeting, and you'd be going crazy. But we're not, because of course you don't have any testimony. So what do you have? You have scientists calling this the most destructive fishing gear in history. And for 3 species that we target, which we have sort of market value, 3, 4, 5, let's say, if we really want to be generous and extend it, okay, let's say 5 species that you target, you throw overboard all these other animals that you don't want because they don't have any value and they don't have taste and they're very watery because they have to live in an environment where it's really kind of difficult to adapt, right? So a lot of these animals are just not even edible. So you throw away 100 species. It's a huge waste. It's not just a huge waste in terms of trade or commerce whatsoever. It's just a complete waste. And out of these animals, there are endangered species of sharks. And there's probably a lot more endangered species, but they haven't been assessed per se. Scientists have assessed some deep water sharks and populations, and they already tell us those are already endangered. So every time you eat a deep sea fish, you're sure this has led to the catch of an endangered species at least. So it doesn't make any sense. And this is in French, I'm sorry about this, but the worst, and this is the French Safety Food Agency, and it tells you that basically these animals, on top of everything else, these animals are full of mercury. So this is a sort of a lose-lose scenario. Who does it benefit? Why do we let it happen? And it's only a handful of boats which are heavily subsidized in Europe, mainly French and Spanish. And these fisheries, and that's what's crazy about this, these fisheries would not be working and would not be operating without us paying for them. So who pays for it? We do. We pay for this because they are subsidized. They have a fuel tax break, and on top of it, they have money. They received a lot of money for constructing these huge boats and for operating them. So we are talking about subsidized fisheries that would not exist if we didn't pay for them. So this is our tax, this is our work, money, which is going into it. And so what do scientists say, to this? They say enough. Enough is enough. 300 scientists, actually even more, like 330 scientists have stepped up and actually signed a form to say, can you please consider, stopping and eliminating the most destructive fishing gear in history? And of course it made sense. So as a result, the fisheries commissioner, a Greek, Maria Damanaki, super brave because she stepped up. And she said, okay, I'm going to confront those huge industrial fishing lobbies. In July 2012, she offered to phase out the most destructive fishing gear in the deep sea. She didn't say stop all fisheries. She knew that wouldn't fly with industry. But she just offered to eliminate the most destructive fishing form. I mean, that's not a huge deal, is it? No, it shouldn't be. Well, what happened is that the industrial lobbies put up a huge fight. And we're talking about a very small industry hiring a lobbying firm, actually G+ Europe, which is, to say it very nicely, doesn't have a very good reputation because they do work for whoever has the money, apparently. So they work for the Russian government. They did the lobbying of Gazprom. They did, they worked for a pharmaceutical industry. They put together this fake sort of PR campaign to try to blackmail the Belgian government over, you can look them up. They're really funky. And now the fishing industry in France and Spain, which don't really have a very good reputation either, have decided to work with the big lobbying firm in Brussels to overturn something that should be a historical and simple, natural move that goes along with scientific advice. And now, what do they have to defend? Because we're actually talking about the European Commission assessed that there are 11 boats in Europe which actually target those deep-sea fish more than 3 days in the year, right? These deep-sea fish only represent 1% of the European fish catch. And there's 102 peer-reviewed scientific publications which tell us that the impact on the habitats or the sustainability of the deep-sea fisheries, they tell us the impacts are terrible, and a sustainable deep-sea fishery doesn't exist. All right, so for the moment it doesn't. I think not a trawl industry, trawl fishery, sorry. So in terms of, what kind of rational elements does the, industrial lobby and their lobbying firm, what can they advocate to try to save deep-sea bottom trawling from being phased out? Well, they create doubt. That's a professional activity. They, blackmail on jobs. And because the job figures are so minute, they can't even be, basically evaluated. They're so little. They basically conceal the evidence. So France and Spain, for example, France, we've been asking and asking and asking for the number of boats that would be impacted by the regulation, because we have a great regulation on the table. It's a historical moment to get rid of something which is an aberration. And the French government has been holding it back, and it's been like this for a long time, because the number of boats is just so ridiculous. There's probably just 9 French boats being impacted, that, of course, they would seem just a little maybe ludicrous. And so the thing that really works, I mean, the magic, the trick, is that you always find your industry-friendly, members of the European Parliament. And these are supposed to accomplish a mission of integrity and, really representing the common interest. And I'm sorry to say that I don't have that much time to share my experience with you, but this is so far from being what happens at the European institutional level, where we find that a lot of the MEPs have very, very strong link with the industry and really just copy-paste their amendments. So they take whatever the industry designs for them and they put them on the table, and this becomes a law, if they manage to convince the other MEPs to vote alongside with them. So we have a real problem of democracy. We have a real problem of how the industrial lobbies are trying to push some, let's say, weighing in on this situation. So the European Parliament had to vote on this on the 10th of December. They rejected the prohibition of this bottom trawl phase out. The industry was sure they were going to lose. They didn't lose, and they were very surprised, and we are also very surprised and disappointed. And it turned out that some members of the European Parliament really messed up their vote. So they had a vote correction right after, and it turned out that just by a few votes, we actually should have won. So in the archives of the European Parliament, deep-sea bottom trawling is prohibited. But in the law, because you cannot change the result of a vote, but the law, as it now went to council for negotiation, the law shows that the prohibition was rejected. So we have a real problem right now. So there is a citizen outrage, and it took a long time to get there. But in France, we had more than 800,000 people that signed on the petition that we put on the Bloom website, calling on the French president to really support the phase-out of deep-sea bottom trawling and to listen to scientists. And what happened, actually, is a story that I have to share with you, because it happened at a TED Talk that I gave in Paris. And I was basically telling the same story. But in the audience, one of you, could be any one of you, in those days was this woman, Pénélope Bagieux, who has a talent of being an amazing illustrator and also an amazing gatekeeper, because she designs comic strips, she puts them online, and she's followed by 100,000 people. And she listened to this story, and she was outraged, and she called me, basically, or she sent me an email, and she said, I want to tell your story, but as a comic strip. And this is where it became seriously fun, or funnily serious, where really she told a serious story, but with humor. And it was all these strips, and the strip was translated into English. And our petition just went from 26,000 signatures to 100 or 800, 1,000 in just a few days, really. So it did happen. And that put a lot of pressure on the main fleet in France, Intermarché, which belongs to a huge supermarket retailer. And they decided, because of public pressure, they decided to themselves limit their fishing activity to 800 meters. It's not great, but it's better than 1,500 or 1,600 or more, right? So just because of public pressure, we managed to basically win this case, not on political grounds, but on the real grounds, on the water in France, right? And right now, we have the situation where you can do the same. So if you have a talent, if you're a gatekeeper, if you're a blogger, if you're an illustrator, if you're an artist, if you're whatever, if you want to tell this story, if you want to, dig into this case and realize that Europe has this historical chance of turning its back on aberration, taking our money to destroy something that took millions of years to form. We can do it, we should do it, it's just so easy. If we can't do this, just give me any idea. Do you have any hope for anything else that we could actually fix? I'm quite nervous, okay? If we can't fix 11 boats destroying the deep ocean, I'm really nervous about the rest. So anyway, I count on you, because the process, although it's not looking great, it's not over. We could overturn what happened at Parliament, because the Council of Member States are talking, And if Greece, if students from the Netherlands and Germany and Greece and UK and Scotland and all these member states in Europe actually come together, especially students, because it's your planet that we're wrecking with our tax money that you're soon going to be paying as well. You can take the future in your hands and please act on this. And let's repeat the magical success story of the TED Talk in Paris and make sure that we can empower future generations to act now on this simple, simple problem. Thanks.